"Stop. Do not open that door." The voice came from the hallway, small but sharp enough to slice through the marble quiet of the mansion. The sound froze him mid-step. Ethan Caldwell, billionaire investor, founder of 3 tech companies, stood still with one hand on the doorknob of his private study. He had come home early that night, earlier than anyone expected, the rain still clinging to his coat. He turned slowly toward the sound. A little girl stood at the end of the corridor, no older than 8, her dark braids damp, her small hands clutching a worn canvas bag. The house lights cast long golden reflections on the polished floor between them. She whispered again, her voice trembling but steady enough to reach him. "Please, sir, do not open it. She is inside." Ethan frowned. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone caught between confusion and disbelief. "You are not supposed to be here." The butler hurried in behind him, panting slightly. "Mr. Caldwell, forgive her. She is the gardener's niece. She wandered in during the storm. I will take her out immediately." The girl shook her head. "I am not lying. She told someone on the phone you were in Chicago. She said she had time." Ethan's grip on the door tightened. From the other side came faint laughter, music, the clinking of a glass. The study was supposed to be empty. He had left it locked. For a moment, all the air in the corridor felt too thick to breathe. "What did you see?" he asked quietly. The girl swallowed hard. "I saw her with another man. She was going to burn something." The butler gasped. "Child, enough." But Ethan lifted a hand to silence him. His mind began to race through possibilities. His wife, his assistant, the contracts on his desk, the safe. He could hear his own heartbeat now, slow and heavy, against the distant hum of the storm outside. The girl took a step closer. "Please, do not touch the door. There is smoke under it." He looked down, and for the first time noticed the faint gray wisp curling from the gap beneath the wood. The scent of paper, hot and sour, reached his nose. He turned the handle slowly, just enough for light to spill through. Inside, shadows moved. The reflection of fire danced against the glass cabinet. In that single heartbeat, everything familiar about his home shifted into something foreign. He closed the door again, gently, and looked back at the child. Her eyes were wide but unwavering. "What is your name?" he asked. "Lila," she whispered. I tried to stop her. For the first time in years, Ethan did not know what to say. His voice came out softer than he meant it to. "You did the right thing." The thunder outside rolled like a warning. Behind the closed door, the music stopped, and in that stillness, he realized that a stranger's voice had just saved everything he thought he controlled. The silence that followed felt heavy, almost like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Ethan Caldwell kept his hand on the doorknob but did not turn it again. He could hear faint movement inside the study, a shadow of footsteps, a rustle, and then nothing. The rain outside beat harder against the windows, filling the pause with its steady rhythm. He looked down at the little girl again, standing there barefoot on the marble floor, her small frame trembling under the oversized raincoat that clearly was not hers. "Lila," he said quietly, "how did you get in here?" She hesitated. "Through the back gate. It was open. I saw the smoke. I thought something bad was happening." The butler interjected quickly, his voice rising with nervous energy. "Mr. Caldwell, she is mistaken. There must be a misunderstanding. Mrs. Caldwell has been resting. Perhaps she dropped a candle or—" Ethan raised one hand, silencing him. His eyes did not leave the girl. "Lila, what did you see before you came inside?" Her fingers twisted together, unsure. "A woman. She was talking to a man on the phone. She said you were gone, that she had to get rid of something before you found out." The butler swallowed hard. "Children imagine things," he insisted. "I will call her guardian right away." But the man's words felt empty against the certainty in the girl's tone. Ethan took a slow breath and finally released the doorknob. "All right," he said, his voice steady but cold. "Step back, both of you." He turned the handle, pushed the door open halfway, and saw at the faint haze of burnt paper in the air, the soft glow from the fireplace where something blackened and curled. His study smelled of smoke and perfume. No one was inside now. Only the evidence remained. On the edge of his mahogany desk, a crystal glass lay tipped over, its contents dripping to the carpet. A contract folder half-burned lay near the hearth. Ethan stepped inside, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the thick rug. "Who was here?" he asked, but his question carried no answer. The butler shifted uneasily behind him. "Sir, perhaps Mrs. Caldwell stepped out. She has been working with the decorators. Maybe they—" "Decorators do not drink whiskey in my office," Ethan said sharply. The room fell quiet again. Lila hovered in the doorway, her large eyes darting between the adults. She looked frightened, not for herself, but for what might happen next. Ethan crouched slightly to meet her gaze. "You said she told someone on the phone that I was in Chicago. Did you hear what else she said?" Lila nodded slowly. "Something about a paper that could ruin her. She was crying. Then she threw it in the fire." Ethan's pulse quickened. He glanced back at the fireplace, then at the folder. The edges of the pages were scorched but still legible enough to see a header, his company's name, Caldwell Technologies, and a signature line that was not his handwriting. "You should not be here," the butler murmured, his voice trembling now. "This is not a place for a child." Lila did not move. "I wanted to help." Ethan turned toward her again. "Why?" Her voice broke softly. "Because no one helped my mother when she saw something bad. Everyone said to stay quiet." The simplicity of her answer struck him deeper than any accusation could. For a moment, he saw not just a child, but a reflection of something he had forgotten: courage without agenda, honesty without fear. He stood up slowly, his face hardening into resolve. "Thank you, Lila," he said. "You did the right thing." He turned to the butler. "Find Mrs. Caldwell. Now." The man hesitated. "Sir, perhaps we should wait until morning." Ethan's voice cut through like a blade. "Now." The butler hurried out, his footsteps fading down the hall. Ethan walked back to his desk, picked up the burned folder, and placed it gently inside a drawer. He pressed the intercom button on the wall. "Security, lock down the east wing. No one leaves the property without my permission." A voice crackled in response. "Understood, Mr. Caldwell." When he looked up again, Lila was still there, standing small and unsure at the doorway. "You are not in trouble," he said quietly, "but you cannot stay in the hall alone. Come with me." He led her to the sitting room across the corridor, where the fire still burned low. He handed her a dry towel and a glass of warm milk from the side table. She took it carefully, murmuring a soft thank you. "You were very brave tonight," he told her. She stared into the firelight, her reflection flickering in the glass. "I was scared," she admitted. "I thought she would hurt you." Ethan's chest tightened at the sincerity in her tone. "You have good instincts," he said. "Never lose that." He turned toward the window. The rain had stopped, but thunder still rumbled in the distance. Somewhere in the house, a door closed softly. Ethan's eyes narrowed. The storm outside had ended, but the one inside his home had just begun. He did not know who he could trust anymore, except perhaps the small, rain-soaked girl who had warned him when no one else dared to speak. The night dragged forward with a tense stillness that seemed to hum through every corner of the mansion. Ethan Caldwell sat in the dim light of the sitting room, his elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the flames dancing in the fireplace. The girl, Lila, sat across from him, wrapped in a blanket that nearly swallowed her whole. She had fallen silent now, sipping carefully from the glass of milk he had given her, her eyes half on the fire, half on him. Every few seconds, thunder grumbled somewhere in the distance, and the sound made her flinch slightly, though she tried to hide it. Ethan's phone buzzed against the coffee table, the screen lighting up with the security feed. He picked it up and scrolled through the camera views. The front gate, the hall, the east wing, nothing unusual. But the study, the one room he now trusted least, showed a faint flicker near the fireplace, like a reflection of something metallic. He leaned closer. "What are you looking at?" Lila asked softly. "Something I cannot yet explain," Ethan replied. "But I need to find out what it is." He set the phone down, then turned toward her. "Lila, when you came in earlier, you said there was a man on the phone. Did you see him, or only hear him?" She shook her head. "I only heard him. He sounded angry. He said she had one more chance to finish it." Ethan frowned. "Finish what?" She hesitated, then whispered. He said, "Burn it all. No one can find the copy." The words hit him like a blow. Burn it all. He stood, walked toward the window, and stared at the dark reflection of the rainy garden outside. The sound of tires crunching gravel echoed faintly from the driveway. "Security patrol," he muttered, though a part of him was not sure. He turned back to Lila. "Stay here. Do not move until I come back." Her eyes widened. "But what if she comes back?" "Then you tell the guard by the door to call me immediately," he said firmly. "No one will hurt you here." She nodded, though he could tell she did not fully believe that. Ethan stepped out into the corridor, his footsteps echoing softly. The air still carried the faint scent of smoke. He walked back to his study and switched on the full lights. The room looked untouched now, almost peaceful, but the scorch marks near the hearth told another story. He crouched near the fireplace and noticed something half buried beneath the ashes, a small flash drive, melted on one edge but still intact enough to recognize. He reached in carefully with a handkerchief and pulled it out. A flash drive, silver, unmarked. He turned it in his fingers. Why hide something like this in the fire? The question burned in his mind. He walked to his computer and connected it, the screen coming to life with a list of encrypted files. Lines of data flickered. He opened one folder, and what he saw made his pulse quicken. Financial transfers, offshore accounts, his wife's signature on documents he had never authorized. He froze, staring at the screen. Behind him, the faintest creak of a floorboard broke the silence. Ethan turned quickly, but no one stood there. The door remained half open, light spilling into the hall. He closed the laptop and slipped the flash drive into his pocket. He walked back toward the sitting room, trying to keep his breathing steady. As he rounded the corner, he saw Lila sitting exactly as he had left her, though her eyes now followed a movement near the window. "Someone is outside," she whispered. Ethan stepped closer, pulling back the curtain just enough to see the reflection of headlights turning away from the driveway. The vehicle disappeared down the hill, its taillights vanishing into the wet night. "She left," Lila said. "Mrs. Caldwell." Ethan looked down at her. "You saw her?" "Yes," Lila said softly. "She went through the garden. She was carrying something. It looked like a box." Ethan's jaw tightened. "All right, then we know she was here." He motioned toward the couch. "Stay put." He walked out again, calling to the butler, but the hall remained empty. The only sound was the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock at the end of the corridor. He checked the kitchen, the foyer, the back door. The locks were still set, the alarm system armed, yet someone had left. When he returned to the sitting room, Lila was standing by the fire, holding something in her small hand. "I found this," she said. It was a silver key, one he recognized instantly. It belonged to his private cabinet, the one that held every original contract of his company's founding. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice low. "It was under the chair," she said. "It fell when she walked past earlier. I saw it shine." Ethan took the key from her and felt the weight of its meaning settle heavily in his palm. "Lila," he said slowly, "what you did tonight may have saved everything I have built." She looked confused. "I just wanted to help." He managed a faint smile. "You did more than help." He turned toward the fireplace again, the firelight flickering against the silver in his hand. Somewhere in the distance, the thunder rolled once more, soft but steady, like a promise that the storm was far from over. Lila stood beside him now, her small frame casting a shadow beside his. For the first time, Ethan realized he was not just protecting his business. He was protecting truth itself. And somehow, a child had been the one to remind him what that really meant. Ethan Caldwell stood by the window as the first faint hint of dawn began to creep across the horizon. The rain had stopped, but fog now wrapped the mansion in a cold stillness. The storm had passed outside, but the storm inside his home had only shifted shape. Behind him, the fireplace hissed softly, its embers glowing low. Lila had fallen asleep on the couch, the blanket pulled up to her chin, her small hand still clutching the corner of it as though she feared it might disappear. Ethan turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. How had this child, a stranger who barely reached his waist, managed to see through the darkness that had clouded his own life for months? He poured himself a glass of water and stared at the reflection that shimmered on its surface. His mind replayed every detail of the night, the smoke, the flash drive, his wife's hurried departure through the garden, and the key in Lila's small hand. Each piece fit too neatly into a puzzle he had never wanted to face. The sound of quiet footsteps made him glance toward the hallway. The butler appeared, his face pale and drawn. "Sir," he began cautiously, "Mrs. Caldwell's car is gone. The gatekeeper says she left around midnight. He thought she had your permission." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Did she take anything with her?" "Yes, sir," the man replied. "A small black box from your study." He assumed it was hers. Ethan nodded slowly. "And you? Did you know about the fire?" The butler hesitated, his eyes dropping to the floor. "I saw the smoke, sir. I tried to reach you, but she said it was under control. She told me to prepare a guest room for a visitor, but no one came." His voice faltered. "I am sorry, sir. I should have questioned her." Ethan studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "We all should have." He turned toward the couch, where Lila stirred slightly, but did not wake. "Did she ever mention the girl?" The butler blinked, confused. "No, sir. I have never seen her before tonight." "She saw more than any of us," Ethan murmured. He motioned toward the door. "Call security. Have them check every camera between here and the north gate. I want to know which direction she went." The butler nodded and left. Ethan walked back to the couch and knelt beside Lila. Her eyes fluttered open. "Is it morning?" she asked sleepily. "Almost," he said gently. "You should rest more. You are safe here." She shook her head and sat up. "I do not feel safe." She looked at me before she left. Through the window, she saw me. Ethan frowned. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Lila whispered. She smiled, but not in a nice way. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Then we will make sure she cannot come near you again." He stood and reached for his phone. A moment later, the head of his security team answered. "Mr. Caldwell, the footage from the garden shows Mrs. Caldwell leaving with a box at exactly 12:23. She went through the north gate in her car. After that, the cameras lost her." "Understood," Ethan said. "Keep that footage secure. No one touches it but me." He ended the call and set the phone down. Lila watched him carefully, her brow furrowed in thought. "Are you mad at her?" she asked quietly. "I am not sure what I am," he replied. "Maybe disappointed, maybe relieved that I finally know the truth." He looked toward the fire again. "Sometimes the worst thing is not betrayal. It is realizing how long you ignored the signs." Lila hugged her knees to her chest. "My mom used to say people do not want to see what hurts them. They close their eyes even when the light is still on." Ethan turned his head slowly to look at her, astonished at the wisdom hidden in her small voice. "Your mother sounds like someone I should have met," he said softly. "She is gone," Lila replied, her voice barely a whisper. "A long time ago." Ethan said nothing for a moment. The house creaked quietly around them, as if acknowledging her words. "Then she would be proud of you," he said finally. "You told the truth when it mattered." Lila looked at him for a long time, her dark eyes steady. "Are you going to tell the truth too?" The question struck him harder than he expected. He swallowed and nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "even if it costs me." Outside, the first birds began to stir in the gray morning. The butler returned, holding a small envelope. "Sir, this was left on your desk. It must have been placed there before she left." Ethan took it. The handwriting was familiar. Inside was a single note written in hurried ink. "Do not look for me. You would never understand." Beneath the words lay a business card for a law firm he had never seen before. He folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. "It seems she wants me to stop asking questions," he said quietly. "But I think we both know that will not happen." Lila tilted her head. "What will you do now?" Ethan looked toward the window where the fog was beginning to lift, revealing the long drive and the world beyond his gate. "First," he said, "I will make breakfast." The answer surprised her, but he smiled faintly. "People make better choices on a full stomach. You cannot fight storms on an empty one." She gave a small, shy smile, and for a brief moment the tension in the room softened. But when he turned away to the kitchen, his expression darkened again. The battle for truth had only begun, and he knew the little girl's warning had opened a door that could never be closed again. Ethan Caldwell moved through the quiet kitchen with deliberate calm, though every muscle in his body felt tight with questions that refused to rest. the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the faint scent of rain drifting through the open window. Morning light spread across the marble counters, touching the silver fixtures and reflecting off the glass cabinets. Lila sat at the large oak table, her legs dangling off the tall chair, her small hands wrapped around a cup of hot chocolate. She watched him carefully, the way children do when they are trying to decide if someone is safe. Ethan poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from her. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The air was heavy with unspoken things. Finally, he asked softly, "Do you have anywhere you need to be, Lila?" She looked down at her cup. "No, sir, not really." Her voice was quiet, polite, but carried a hint of something older than her age. "My aunt works sometimes at the garden house behind your big wall. I stay there when she lets me, but she left yesterday morning. She said she would be gone for a few days." Ethan frowned. "So you are alone?" She nodded, then quickly added, "It is all right. I have been alone before." Those words hit him harder than she probably realized. He leaned back, his gaze softening. "You should not have to be alone, not at your age." Lila shrugged, her small shoulders rising like she had learned long ago not to expect comfort. "People get busy. They forget." Ethan took a sip of his coffee and set the cup down with care. "Well," he said after a moment, "until your aunt returns, you are staying here. It is not safe outside, and I owe you more than I can say." Her eyes widened slightly. "Stay here? In this house?" He nodded. "You can have one of the guest rooms upstairs. I will ask Mrs. Benson, my housekeeper, to make sure you have clothes and food." Lila hesitated, twisting the hem of her blanket. "You do not have to, sir. I did not help because I wanted something." "I know that," he replied gently. "That is exactly why I want to help." For the first time, she smiled a little, the corners of her mouth lifting shyly. The sound of footsteps broke the fragile peace. The butler appeared at the doorway, holding a tablet. "Sir, the security footage has been reviewed. The box Mrs. Caldwell took appears to contain several documents and what looks like an external hard drive. The cameras caught her meeting someone at the end of the road. A black sedan, tinted windows. We could not see the driver." Ethan's expression hardened. "Send me that clip." He turned the screen toward himself and watched the brief video. The image was grainy but clear enough to recognize her figure, her coat, the way she looked over her shoulder before getting into the car. Lila watched him quietly. "That is her, isn't it?" she asked. Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, that is her." The butler hesitated. "Shall I notify the police, sir?" Ethan's answer came after a pause. "Not yet. We do not know everything. If she is meeting someone, I need to know who that person is first." The butler gave a small nod and left. Lila tilted her head. "You are not mad?" Ethan exhaled. "Angry, yes. But more than that, I am disappointed. It takes time to build trust. It takes seconds to destroy it." Lila nodded as if she understood, though the weight of his words belonged to a world she had only glimpsed from afar. She stared at the reflection of the firelight on her cup and said softly, "Sometimes people lie because they are scared. My mom used to lie when she thought telling the truth would make things worse." Ethan looked at her with quiet surprise. "Do you think that is what happened here?" Lila shrugged again. "Maybe. Grown-ups get scared too, even when they do not say it." Her innocence carried a truth that made him fall silent. The rest of breakfast passed with small sounds, the soft clink of the spoon against her cup, the distant chirp of morning birds outside the window. When she finished, he stood. "Come on," he said, offering his hand. "Let me show you where you will stay." She hesitated before taking it, her tiny fingers barely wrapping around his. Together, they walked up the grand staircase, past tall portraits that watched like silent witnesses. He opened the door to a guest room at the end of the hall. The curtains were drawn back, letting sunlight spill across the white sheets. A vase of lilies stood on the bedside table, their scent light and clean. "This will be your room," he said. "You can rest here, and if you need anything, you can ask Mrs. Benson. She will take care of you." Lila stepped inside slowly, her eyes wide as she took in the room. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "I never had a room just for me before." Ethan smiled faintly. "Then it is about time you did." She turned toward him, her face earnest. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell." He nodded. "Call me Ethan." She shook her head. No, sir. I like calling you Mr. Caldwell. It sounds kind. The sincerity in her voice softened something inside him that had been hard for far too long. All right then, he said quietly. Rest for a while. I have a few things to take care of. As he turned to leave, she called softly, Mr. Caldwell? He looked back. Yes? You are not like the people she talked to on the phone, Lila said. You listen. He held her gaze for a moment, and then smiled, though his chest felt heavy. Then I hope I keep doing that. When he closed the door behind him, he paused in the hallway, the silver key still in his pocket, the burned flash drive locked in his desk. For the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell felt something he had almost forgotten: responsibility not just for what he built, but for who he was becoming. The morning light filled the mansion with a deceptive calm that did not match the storm inside Ethan Caldwell's thoughts. Hours had passed since he had shown Lila to her room, but sleep had not come to him. He stood in his study once again, staring at the ashes in the fireplace where pieces of his past and his trust had burned. The scent of smoke lingered faintly, as if reminding him that even when a fire is gone, its mark stays. He opened the drawer, where he had locked the flash drive. The small device rested there like a secret waiting to be confessed. He connected it again to his computer, scrolling through the encrypted files he had barely touched the night before. The numbers, the transactions, and the unfamiliar signatures formed a map of betrayal that spread wider with each click. His wife had been transferring money from one of his companies into accounts connected to names he did not recognize. A law firm in another state, a charity that did not exist. Every line of data pulled a thread that made the entire fabric of his life unravel further. The screen's light flickered across his face as he whispered, "Why?" Behind him, a quiet knock sounded. He closed the laptop quickly. "Come in." The door opened just enough for Lila to peek through, her small face half hidden behind the frame. "I am sorry, Mr. Caldwell," she said softly. "I could not sleep. The rain started again." Her voice trembled a little, though she tried to stand tall. Ethan gestured for her to come in. "You do not need to apologize. I could not sleep either." She stepped into the room, her bare feet making no sound on the thick carpet. "Is that where she burned the papers?" she asked, looking toward the fireplace. Ethan nodded. "Yes, that is where it started." She came closer, her eyes tracing the faint black marks on the floor. "Fire is strange," she said thoughtfully. "It can hurt, but sometimes it helps too. My mom used to say fire tells the truth. It shows what is strong enough to survive." Ethan studied her small, serious face and found himself nodding slowly. "Your mother was right." For a moment, the room fell quiet again, filled only by the low hum of the computer and the distant patter of rain. Then Lila's gaze moved to the silver key resting beside the keyboard. "That key," she said. "Is it for something important?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "Yes, it opens a cabinet that holds everything I built my life on. And right now, I am not sure if opening it will make things better or worse." She tilted her head. "Maybe if you do not open it, the bad things win." The simplicity of her logic made him smile faintly. "You sound like someone who has fought a few bad things yourself." She shrugged. "Sometimes the bad things do not look like monsters. Sometimes they wear nice clothes." Her honesty disarmed him in a way no adult could. He stood and walked to the cabinet. The lock clicked open under the weight of the silver key. Inside, rows of folders and sealed envelopes sat neatly arranged, each one labeled with the precision of a man who once believed control was the same as safety. He pulled out one labeled Founding Documents and opened it on the desk. As he turned the pages, his eyes caught a signature that should not have been there: his wife's name, next to a transfer of ownership dated just 3 weeks earlier. The paper trembled slightly in his hand. "She sold part of the company," he murmured. Lila stepped closer, her small voice cautious. "Is that bad?" "It means she gave something that was not hers to give," he said quietly. He sat down heavily, the weight of the realization pressing down on him. Lila reached for a small photo frame lying face down on the desk. She turned it over and looked at the image inside a younger Ethan standing beside his wife at a charity event, both smiling for the camera. "You look happy here," she said. "We were," Ethan replied. "At least I thought we were. Sometimes people change, and you do not see it until they are already gone." Lila placed the frame back carefully. Maybe she will come back, she offered. Ethan looked at her, his voice softer now. If she does, it will not be the same. Some things, once broken, do not go back the way they were, but that does not mean you stop trying to fix what is right. Lila nodded slowly, as if she understood more than her years should allow. When my mom died, she said quietly, I thought everything good went with her, but then I met people who were kind, and it felt like she was still here, just in a different way. Her words lingered in the air, weaving through the quiet space between them. Ethan's throat tightened. You have a way of making difficult things sound simple, he said. She smiled, a little shy but sure. Maybe because I do not know enough to make them complicated. He let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. You might be the wisest person in this house, Lila. The rain outside softened to a drizzle, the sound steady and gentle now. Ethan closed the folder, locked the cabinet again, and placed the key back in his pocket. Go back to bed, he said kindly. Tomorrow we will figure out what to do next. Lila hesitated, then said, If you need help, I can listen. I know you can, he said, and I will remember that. As she left the room, he watched her small figure disappear down the hall. The mansion felt less empty now, though the answers he sought were still buried in lies and ashes. Ethan turned off the computer, extinguished the lamp, and stood in the dark for a moment. Somewhere deep down, a flicker of resolve burned brighter than the embers in the fireplace. He was no longer just a man who had been warned. He was a man who had started to listen. Ethan Caldwell woke before sunrise, his mind restless even as the house still slept. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain that had finally faded into the earth. He dressed quietly, avoiding the creak of the wooden floors as he walked down the hall toward his study. The mansion felt different now, less like a fortress, and more like a question he could no longer avoid answering. He turned on the small desk lamp, its golden light spilling across the papers he had locked away just hours ago. He studied the documents again, tracing the faint signature that had started it all, the one that was not his. His wife's name stared back at him in perfect loops of ink. Every page was a whisper of deceit. He rubbed his temples, feeling the dull ache of too many thoughts and too little truth. The sound of small footsteps made him glance toward the door. Lila stood there in her oversized sweater, rubbing her eyes. You are up early, she said softly. Ethan smiled faintly. So are you. I heard the door, she said, stepping into the room. I thought maybe you were leaving. Not yet, he replied. I am trying to understand what I missed. She came closer, looking at the papers spread across his desk. That is what she did, right? The lady who left? He nodded. Yes. She took something that did not belong to her, and she lied about it. Lila tilted her head. Maybe she thought if she told the truth, you would not forgive her. The words landed heavier than she knew. Forgiveness. Ethan had not thought about that word in a long time. He had spent years building things that could not lie to him, walls, contracts, machines, but people were different. People carried their secrets quietly until they could not anymore. You think I should forgive her? He asked. Lila shrugged. I do not know, but I think if you do not, you will keep feeling like this. Her small hand motioned toward his chest, like something is heavy in there. He looked at her, surprised by her clarity. You are very good at seeing things, Lila. She smiled a little. It is easier to see when you are small. Grown-ups look past the obvious because they are busy looking up. Ethan laughed softly, the first real laugh in days. You might be right about that. He stood and walked toward the window, watching as the sky shifted from gray to pale gold. I spent my whole life thinking control meant safety, he said quietly. But control only hides what is broken. It never fixes it. Lila joined him at the window. My mom used to say that people who try to hold everything end up holding nothing. That is why she liked gardening. She said you cannot control how flowers grow. You just help them, and you wait. Ethan nodded slowly. She must have been a very wise woman. She was, Lila whispered. But no one listened to her until it was too late. The sadness in her voice was soft but deep. Ethan turned to her. Then I will listen to you, Lila, starting now. The moment hung between them, quiet and warm. Then his phone buzzed, slicing through the calm. He answered, his tone firm. Caldwell. It was the head of security. Sir, we found the car your wife left in. It was abandoned near the old industrial road outside the city. There are tire tracks from another vehicle next to it. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Any sign of her? No, sir. But the box she took is gone. Send me the location, Ethan said. I will handle it. He ended the call and turned back to Lila. I have to go check something, but you will stay here, Mrs. Benson will look after you. Lila frowned. Will you be back? Yes, he said. I promise. She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, a simple woven bracelet made of faded red and white string. Take this, she said. It keeps people safe. My mom made it. Ethan looked at it, unsure. Lila, I cannot take this. It is important to you. That is why you should have it, she said. So you come back. Her seriousness left him with no room to argue. He tied the bracelet around his wrist, the soft thread snug against his skin. Then I will come back, he said quietly. Because someone should. He left soon after, the sound of his car fading down the long driveway as dawn broke fully over the hills. Lila stood by the window upstairs, watching until the road curved out of sight. The mansion felt larger now, emptier, but she did not feel alone. Downstairs, Mrs. Benson found her sitting on the staircase, holding the blanket around her shoulders. You should rest, dear, the housekeeper said kindly. He will be fine. Lila nodded but did not move. He will find her, she said softly. And when he does, the truth will come out. It always does. Mrs. Benson paused, looking at her with quiet awe. You speak like someone who has seen too much. Maybe I have, Lila said. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, casting warm gold across the marble floor. For the first time since she had arrived, the house did not feel haunted by silence. It felt like it was waiting for him to return, for the truth to finish its climb out of the dark, for something broken to finally begin to mend. Ethan Caldwell drove through the fog-covered road that led away from the city, his headlights slicing through the gray air. The morning sun was hidden behind thick clouds, turning everything into shades of silver and cold blue. The bracelet around his wrist brushed softly against the steering wheel every time he turned it, a small reminder of the promise he had made to come back. The industrial road was quiet, lined with abandoned warehouses and scattered debris that told stories of years gone by. When he reached the spot the security team had marked, he slowed the car and pulled over beside the old chain-link fence. There it was, his wife's car, its silver paint dulled by rain and dust, parked crookedly near a rusted loading dock. The driver's door was open. The wind moved through the car like a sigh. He stepped out, scanning the ground. The gravel crunched under his shoes as he approached. The passenger seat was empty, but the faint scent of her perfume lingered, a ghostly reminder of her presence. On the ground beside the car lay a single high-heeled shoe, tipped on its side like it had been dropped mid-step. He crouched to examine it, his mind racing. She was here, he murmured. He could see the tire tracks beside the car, now two sets, one from her vehicle and another, heavier set from a larger car or truck. Whoever she had met had left with her, or without her. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was the security team again. Sir, we tracked the second vehicle on a traffic camera near the river bridge. It turned west toward the old storage yards. Send me the coordinates, Ethan said. As he spoke, he heard another car approaching behind him. He turned sharply, but instead of a threat, he saw one of his security SUVs pulling up. The driver stepped out, holding a flashlight. Mr. Caldwell, we should not stay here long. The area is unsafe. Ethan nodded. Search the vehicle, document everything. I am going to the yards. The man hesitated. Sir, should we call the authorities? Ethan's eyes hardened. Not yet. I want to know what we are dealing with before this becomes public. He got back into his car and drove away, the bracelet glinting faintly in the morning light. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Lila sat by the window in the guest room, her chin resting on the windowsill. The world outside was waking up, the garden drenched in dew. Mrs. Benson had brought her breakfast, but she had barely touched it. She kept staring at the long driveway, waiting for the black car to return. Every sound made her heart quicken: a bird's cry, the wind, the creak of the iron gate. The housekeeper entered quietly. "You will worry yourself sick, child," she said kindly. "Mr. Caldwell will be all right." Lila nodded but did not look away from the window. "He said he would come back. He has to." Mrs. Benson sighed softly. "You care for him, do you not?" Lila's small voice trembled. "He listens. That makes him different." The housekeeper smiled sadly. "Then let us both listen and trust." Hours passed. The rain returned, light but steady. Ethan reached the edge of the old storage yards just as thunder rolled across the sky again. The place was empty, the kind of forgotten ground where secrets could rest for years without being disturbed. He parked near a faded warehouse marked with peeling numbers. The front door was ajar, swinging slightly with each gust of wind. He stepped inside cautiously. The air smelled of rust, oil, and time. His footsteps echoed softly against the concrete floor. A faint sound came from the back, a voice, muffled but distinct. He followed it, turning corners until he reached a small office at the far end. Inside, he found something that stopped him cold. The black box from his study sat on the desk, open. Next to it lay a phone, still recording a voice message. He pressed play. His wife's voice filled the air, shaky, tired, and full of regret. "If you are hearing this, it means I failed to fix what I started. I thought I could protect you by keeping the truth from you, but I made it worse. They wanted your company, Ethan. They wanted to use me to sign everything away. I thought if I gave them part, they would stop. But they will not. Please do not look for me. They are watching." The message ended abruptly, leaving only the sound of the rain tapping against the broken window. Ethan's hand trembled as he held the phone. The truth was no longer just about betrayal. It was about danger. He closed the box, took both items, and walked back to his car. As he started the engine, he looked down at the bracelet again. "I am coming back," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Back at the mansion, Lila's eyes grew heavy with exhaustion, but she refused to sleep. She curled up on the couch in the living room, the blanket wrapped tight around her. "Mrs. Benson covered her gently and whispered, "He will keep his word, dear. Some men still do." Lila's lips moved in a sleepy murmur. "He promised." The rain outside grew heavier, drumming softly on the roof. And miles away, Ethan drove through the storm with steady hands, guided not by anger now, but by the quiet courage of a child's belief in him. For the first time in years, he was not running from the truth. He was running toward it. Ethan Caldwell drove back through the storm with the black box beside him on the passenger seat, the windshield wipers sweeping in steady rhythm. The recording of his wife's voice still echoed in his mind, her words tangled with guilt and fear. The truth had finally begun to show itself, but it came with more questions than answers. When he reached the mansion, the lights from the windows cut through the rain like warm beacons. He parked, stepped out, and walked quickly through the front doors. Mrs. Benson met him in the hallway, worry etched across her face. "Mr. Caldwell, thank goodness you are back," she said softly. "The little one has been waiting all day." Ethan brushed the rain from his coat and nodded. "Is she all right?" "She fell asleep in the living room," the housekeeper replied. "She would not leave that spot until you returned." Ethan felt a quiet ache at her words. "Thank you, Mrs. Benson. You can rest now." The woman nodded and disappeared down the corridor. He walked toward the living room, his footsteps soft against the marble floor. The fire had burned low, filling the air with a warm amber glow. Lila lay curled up on the couch, the blanket pulled around her shoulders, her breathing slow and even. Ethan stood for a moment, watching her sleep. The innocence on her face felt like a fragile reminder of everything he still needed to protect. He moved quietly to place the black box on the side table. As he did, Lila stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "You came back," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "I told you I would," he said gently. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. "Did you find her?" "Not yet," he replied, "but I found the truth." Lila tilted her head, confusion mixing with curiosity. Was it bad? Ethan sighed, sitting on the chair across from her. It was complicated. She was trying to protect me, but she chose the wrong way. Lila listened quietly, her small hands clasped in her lap. Sometimes people think hiding things keeps others safe, but lies make things heavy. Ethan smiled faintly at her words. Yes, they do. He leaned back, his gaze settling on the fire. She was being used by people who wanted to take my company. She thought if she gave them what they wanted, they would stop, but they never do. Lila frowned. That is not fair. No, he said softly. It is not. For a moment, the room was silent except for the soft crackle of the fire. Then Lila said, "You can fix it. You always fix things, do you not?" Ethan looked at her with surprise. "Why do you think that?" "Because you are still here," she said simply. "People who give up do not come back." Her faith in him felt like something too big for his heart to hold. "Maybe you are right," he said, "but I cannot do it alone." Lila smiled a little. "Then I will help. I am good at noticing things." Ethan laughed softly. "That you are." He turned to the black box and opened it carefully. Inside were stacks of documents, files marked with unfamiliar names, and several flash drives. One stood out, a small silver one with a red mark near the edge. He plugged it into his laptop, and the screen filled with rows of coded data, similar to what he had seen before. But this time there was a folder labeled Witness. He opened it. The first file was a series of recorded phone calls. He clicked one at random, and a man's voice played, calm but threatening. "You will deliver the files before Friday, or the board will vote without him. You understand?" Ethan froze. The voice was one he knew, the chairman of his own company. His breath caught in his throat. "They planned this," he whispered. "All of them." Lila leaned closer, though she could not fully understand. "Is that bad?" "It means they were going to take everything I built," he said. "But now we have proof." She smiled slightly. "Then we win, right?" Ethan's eyes softened. "Not yet, but we are close." The sound of thunder rolled outside again, shaking the window panes. He closed the laptop and took a deep breath. "Lila, I need you to promise me something. If anything happens, you go to Mrs. Benson and do exactly what she says. All right?" Her brow furrowed. "Are you leaving again?" "Not tonight," he said, "but soon. I have to face them." She nodded slowly, her trust quiet but complete. "I will wait," she said, just like before. He reached across the small table and took her hand. "You have already done more than enough, Lila. You reminded me what matters." She looked down at their hands and whispered, "You matter too, Mr. Caldwell." He felt his throat tighten at the words. "Thank you," he said softly. "Now get some rest." She lay back down, closing her eyes, and within minutes her breathing deepened again. Ethan stayed there for a long time, watching the fire flicker lower and lower until only glowing embers remained. He looked at the bracelet on his wrist and thought of how easily truth could be buried and how rare it was to find someone brave enough to dig it out again. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle, and the night settled into silence. The fight was not over, but justice had finally begun to stir in the dark. Ethan Caldwell awoke to the pale light of dawn spilling through the tall windows of his study. The fire had long burned out, leaving only faint warmth on the marble hearth. His laptop still glowed dimly on the desk, the folder labeled Witness open on the screen. The evidence inside was enough to destroy everything the corrupt board members had planned, but it would also drag his wife's name into the storm. He sat back in the leather chair, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts tangled between justice and mercy. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The air felt clean, but heavy with the kind of stillness that comes right before a decision that changes everything. He rubbed the bracelet around his wrist, feeling the rough threads of red and white that Lila had given him. It reminded him of a promise to come back, to tell the truth, to protect the small voices that others ignored. He stood and walked quietly into the living room, where Lila was sitting cross-legged on the couch, fully awake now, her hair a tangle of soft curls. She looked up at him with sleepy eyes and a small smile. "You did not sleep much," she said. "Neither did you," he replied, his voice carrying both fatigue and tenderness. She shrugged. "I was waiting." Ethan sat down across from her, resting his elbows on his knees. "You have been waiting a lot since you came here," he said. "You should not have to." Lila looked down at her hands. "Waiting is easier when you believe someone will come back." Her words were simple, but they reached something deep in him. "You really believe in that, do you not?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, it is what keeps people kind, even when everything goes bad." Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of her wisdom pressing gently against his chest. "Lila," he said, "I have to do something difficult today, something that might make people angry with me." Her eyes widened a little. "Is it about the people from the phone call?" He nodded. "Yes, I have to tell the truth about them, about everything they did." Lila tilted her head. "That is good, right?" Ethan smiled sadly. "It is good, but it will hurt people too. Sometimes truth does both." Lila frowned, thinking deeply. "My mom used to say that truth is like cleaning a wound. It stings first, but it makes you heal." Ethan looked at her for a long moment and finally nodded. "Then maybe it is time to clean the wound." The rest of the morning moved slowly. Mrs. Benson brought them breakfast, but Ethan barely touched his food. His thoughts kept circling the same question: could he forgive his wife without losing his sense of justice? Around mid-morning, his phone rang. The name on the screen was one he had been expecting: David Shaw, the chairman of the board, the man whose voice had been in the recordings. Ethan answered, keeping his tone steady. "David." "Ethan, we need to talk," the man said quickly. "There are rumors going around. People are saying you have some files. If that is true, we can fix this quietly. No need to make a spectacle." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Quiet fixes are how this started, David. No more." There was a pause. "You are making a mistake, Ethan. Think of your wife." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, the pain sharp in his chest. "I am," he said softly. "And that is why I am doing this." He ended the call. Lila watched from the couch, her expression unreadable. "Was that him?" she asked. "Yes," Ethan said. "The man who wanted to take everything." She nodded slowly. "He sounds scared." Ethan allowed himself a faint smile. He should be. He walked to the window, looking out at the clearing sky. Sunlight began to pour through the glass, painting the room in gold. The light caught the bracelet on his wrist, and for the first time in months, he felt clarity. "Lila," he said, turning back to her, "when I go to the office today, I am going to tell everyone the truth. All of it. I will show them the proof, and I will not hide behind anyone's lies anymore." She looked at him with quiet pride. "Then you will be free." "Maybe we both will," he said. Before he left, he knelt in front of her so they were eye to eye. "If I am not back by nightfall, you listen to Mrs. Benson. She will keep you safe." Lila hesitated, her small hand reaching to touch his wrist. "You will come back. You promised." He smiled softly. "I did." He stood and picked up his briefcase. The papers inside felt lighter than they should have, as if the truth itself had begun to carry some of the weight. As he walked toward the door, he looked back one last time. Lila was standing by the window, watching him with steady eyes. The sun behind her framed her in light, small but unshakable, like a reminder of everything he still had to fight for. Outside, the car waited at the gate. He stepped inside, exhaling deeply. The city skyline was visible in the distance, sharp against the brightening sky. For the first time, Ethan did not feel afraid of what the truth might take away. He was ready to face it, to bring light into the places that had hidden too long in the dark. And somewhere behind him, in a quiet house that finally felt alive, a little girl whispered softly to herself, "He will tell the truth. I know he will." Ethan Caldwell's car moved steadily through the city streets as the morning sun began to climb higher, washing the glass towers in pale gold. He had driven this route countless times before, but today it felt different. Today he was not the man people thought they knew, the man who smiled for cameras, who spoke in measured tones at conferences, who trusted too easily. Today he was a man who had finally stopped running from the truth. The bracelet around his wrist brushed softly against the steering wheel, its rough threads grounding him. It reminded him of the little girl who had stood unflinching in front of a storm that was never hers to face. When he reached the glass headquarters of Caldwell Technologies, he paused in the car for a moment before stepping out. The security guard at the door greeted him, unaware that this morning would mark a turning point for the company and everyone tied to it. Ethan entered the lobby, his footsteps echoing sharply on the marble floor. Employees glanced up as he passed, sensing something in his stride that was quieter, but more dangerous than anger. He went straight to the top floor, where the boardroom waited. The long table gleamed under the overhead lights, surrounded by men in tailored suits, the same men who had shaken his hand 100 times with smiles that never reached their eyes. David Shaw, the chairman, sat at the head of the table, pretending calm but unable to meet Ethan's gaze. "Ethan," he said with forced ease, "we are glad you could make it. Let us clear the air and handle this like professionals." Ethan placed his briefcase on the table, opened it, and slid the silver flash drive across the polished wood. "Then let us start with the truth," he said quietly. The room fell silent. David's smile faltered. "What is this?" Ethan looked him straight in the eye. "Evidence. Transfers, offshore accounts, recorded calls including yours. Everything you thought you buried." A murmur rippled through the board. One of the younger executives leaned forward. "Is this some kind of threat?" "No," Ethan replied, his tone calm but steady. "It is a confession, not mine, yours. You all used my wife to do your dirty work. You thought she could hide the trail. You were wrong." David's face reddened. "You have no idea what you are saying. You will destroy this company." "No," Ethan said softly. "You already tried to." He inserted the flash drive into the projector. The screen behind him came to life with the first recording, the same voice they all knew too well. David's voice, giving orders to manipulate votes and transfer assets. No one spoke. The evidence was undeniable. When the last recording ended, Ethan looked around the table. "You built your empire on deceit," he said. "I built mine on trust. That is the difference between us." David stood suddenly, his voice shaking. "You think this makes you a hero? You will lose everything." Ethan's voice remained calm. "Maybe, but at least I will lose it honestly." He gathered the remaining papers, closed his briefcase, and turned toward the door. "The authorities already have copies. You can explain it to them." As he left the room, the silence behind him broke into whispers and panic. He walked through the building slowly, each step lighter than it had felt in years. The burden he had carried was no longer on his shoulders. Outside, the air felt cleaner. He looked up at the sky, now clear blue, and exhaled deeply. Back at the mansion, Lila sat in the garden with Mrs. Benson. The sunlight touched the flowers around her, tiny drops of dew glistening on each petal. She was plucking small daisies and arranging them in a circle. "Do you think he did it?" she asked. Mrs. Benson smiled gently. "I do. Men like Mr. Caldwell do not break their promises." Lila nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "He said he would tell the truth. I think he did." Hours later, when Ethan returned, the sky had begun to shift toward the warm tones of late afternoon. He parked the car and walked toward the house, feeling the strange, unfamiliar quiet of peace beginning to settle inside him. Lila saw him first and ran to meet him halfway down the path. "You came back," she said, her voice bright. Ethan smiled and crouched slightly so he could meet her eyes. "I told you I would." "Did it work?" she asked eagerly. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, it worked." "Are you sad?" she asked softly. "Maybe a little," he admitted. "Telling the truth is never easy, but I am free now." She looked at him for a moment and said something that made his chest tighten. "Then your heart is lighter than before." He smiled. "It is." They walked back to the house together, her small hand holding his. The setting sun painted the mansion in gold and orange, and for the first time since everything began, Ethan Caldwell felt something close to peace. The ghosts that had haunted his home were quiet now, replaced by the steady rhythm of truth finding its way through the ruins of lies. As they reached the door, Lila looked up at him and said, "My mom used to say when people tell the truth, even the house breathes easier." Ethan looked around at the soft glow of the windows and the gentle rustle of the trees. "Then I think this house is finally breathing again," he said. The evening breeze carried the scent of rain and new beginnings. and somewhere in the quiet, the smallest voice had helped a man find his way back to the light. Ethan Caldwell woke early the next morning, long before the sun reached the windows. The mansion was quiet, wrapped in a peace he had not felt in years. The storm of truth had passed, leaving behind something both fragile and new. He moved through the house in silence, his hand brushing against the polished wood of the banister, as if feeling the heartbeat of the home itself. Downstairs, the faint scent of breakfast drifted through the air. In the kitchen, Mrs. Benson was already at work, humming softly to herself. Lila sat at the counter, her legs swinging gently as she watched the older woman flip pancakes. Her laughter, light and unguarded, filled the room when Mrs. Benson teased her about eating too many. When Ethan stepped in, they both looked up. Lila's face brightened instantly. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," she said. "You look different today." He smiled faintly. "Do I?" "Yes," she replied with certainty. "You look lighter, like you are not carrying a storm anymore." Ethan chuckled quietly. "Maybe I am not." Mrs. Benson placed a plate of pancakes in front of him. "You did the right thing yesterday," she said. "The news is already spreading. People are saying you stood up against corruption." He sat down at the table, his fingers curling around the warm cup of coffee she handed him. "I did what had to be done. The rest will sort itself out." Lila tilted her head. "Are they mad at you now?" He looked at her, his eyes soft. "Some are, but that is all right. The truth makes some people angry before it makes things better." She nodded thoughtfully, as if she had learned that lesson long ago. They ate together quietly, the simple rhythm of clinking forks and soft conversation, weaving a sense of home that Ethan had not realized he missed. When breakfast was over, he turned to Lila. "How would you like to take a walk outside? The garden looks alive again after all that rain." Her eyes lit up. "Can we go to the pond?" "Of course," he said. "Let us go." The morning air was crisp as they stepped outside. The garden glistened under the gentle light, each blade of grass jeweled with dew. Lila ran ahead, her laughter echoing between the hedges. Ethan followed at a slower pace, watching her with quiet wonder. She stopped by the pond, kneeling to look at the reflection of the sky rippling in the water. "It looks like a mirror," she said. "Everything is clearer today." "Yes," Ethan replied softly. "Clarity comes after storms." She turned to him. "Will you have to leave again?" "Not for a while," he said. "The company will need rebuilding, but I can do that from here. I think this place needs me more." Lila smiled. "Good. Because I like it when you are here." They walked along the stone path, the sound of birds filling the space between their words. At the far end of the garden stood a small bench beneath an old oak tree. Ethan sat down, and Lila joined him, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said, "we start again. We make things right, one step at a time." She looked at him seriously. "Does that mean you forgive her, the lady who left?" He paused, gazing across the pond where the sunlight danced on the water's surface. "I think forgiveness is not something you give all at once," he said slowly. "It is something you work toward. I may not be there yet, but I am closer than before." Lila nodded, understanding in her quiet way. "My mom used to say forgiveness is like planting seeds. You have to water them even when you do not see anything growing yet." Ethan turned to her, smiling. "Your mother was a wise woman." "She was," Lila said, looking down at her shoes. "She always wanted me to find people who were kind. I think I did." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, not from pain but from gratitude. "And I think I found someone brave enough to remind me what kindness really looks like." She grinned at that, and for a moment the world felt lighter again. They sat in silence, listening to the breeze rustle through the leaves. A single butterfly drifted past them, its wings glinting gold in the sunlight. "Mr. Caldwell," Lila said suddenly, her tone curious. "Will I stay here for a while?" He nodded. "As long as you want. You have a home here now." Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," he said firmly. "You brought light into this house when it needed it most. It is only fair that the house returns the favor." Lila looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with a mix of joy and disbelief. "Thank you," she whispered. "You do not have to thank me," he said. "You earned it. The sound of the church bell in the distance signaled late morning. Ethan stood and extended his hand to her. "Come on, let us head back. I believe Mrs. Benson is planning to bake something sweet, and I would rather not miss that." Lila laughed and slipped her small hand into his. As they walked back toward the mansion, the sunlight grew warmer, wrapping them both in gold. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Ethan did not fear it. The truth had cost him much, but it had also given him something priceless, a second chance to build a life anchored in honesty and compassion. And beside him walked the living proof that even the smallest voice could carry enough courage to change a man's heart forever. Ethan Caldwell spent the next few days rebuilding the quiet rhythm of life inside the mansion. The chaos that had once filled his mind had given way to calm determination. He met with his lawyers, handed over the evidence, and spoke to the press only once, his statement simple and unembellished. "The truth deserves light," he said, "and every wrong can be made right if you start by being honest." The world outside was loud with speculation, but inside his home, peace was slowly returning. Lila had become a gentle presence in every corner of the house. Her laughter filled the halls that had once echoed only with silence. She followed Mrs. Benson around the kitchen, eager to learn everything from how to knead dough to how to measure sugar without spilling it. Ethan would often stand at the doorway, watching her, realizing that her presence had changed the energy of the place completely. The house no longer felt like a monument to power. It felt alive, like a home. One evening, the sky turned a deep amber, and the smell of baking bread drifted through the air. Ethan sat in the library, reading through old letters, when Lila appeared at the door, holding a plate with 2 warm rolls. "Mrs. Benson said you did not eat dinner yet," she said, her voice soft but insistent. Ethan smiled and motioned for her to come in. "Thank you," he said, taking one of the rolls. "Did you make these yourself?" "Mostly," she said proudly. "I think I used too much butter, but Mrs. Benson said that is never a bad thing." He chuckled, taking a bite. "She is right. These are perfect." Lila sat across from him, her eyes wandering over the tall shelves of books that stretched to the ceiling. "Do you read all of these?" she asked. "Not yet," Ethan replied. "Some books are meant to wait for the right moment." "What kind of books do you like?" "The ones that tell the truth," he said. "Even when it hurts." Lila tilted her head. "Like what you did at work." He nodded. "Exactly like that." She looked thoughtful. "My mom liked stories where people got second chances. She said everyone deserves one if they are brave enough to change." Ethan's expression softened. "Your mother was a wise woman." "She was," Lila said quietly. "I miss her most at night. That is when she would hum songs to help me sleep." Ethan's heart ached at the honesty in her words. "Would you like me to leave the lights on in your room tonight?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "No, I am not scared anymore. This house feels safe now." That simple admission warmed him more than any fire could. After she finished her roll, she stood and walked toward the window. The garden outside shimmered in the fading light. "Do you think things can grow again even after they have been broken?" she asked suddenly. Ethan followed her gaze. "Yes," he said softly. "Sometimes broken things grow stronger because they have already learned how to survive." She turned toward him with a small smile. "Then maybe we are like the garden." He nodded. "Maybe we are." The clock chimed softly, marking the hour. Lila yawned and stretched. "Mrs. Benson says I have to go to bed early if I want to help her in the morning." Ethan smiled. "Then you should listen to her. Good night, Lila." She hesitated at the door. "Good night, Mr. Caldwell. Thank you for letting me stay." "It is not about letting you stay," he said. "This is your home now, too." Her eyes brightened, and she disappeared down the hall. Ethan sat back in his chair, staring at the empty plate on the table. The sound of her footsteps fading upstairs filled him with a quiet kind of peace he had not known he needed. Later, he walked through the mansion, turning off lights one by one. When he reached the staircase, he paused. The faint hum of Lila's voice drifted from her room, a soft tune that carried through the hall like a blessing. He leaned against the banister, closing his eyes for a moment. In her small, unknowing way, she had brought him back to life. The next morning, the world outside would continue to debate headlines and question motives. But here, in the calm of this house, something truer was growing: trust, forgiveness, and the quiet bond between two souls who had found healing in each other's kindness. The storm that had once shattered his life was now only a memory, replaced by a light that came not from power or wealth, but from the courage of a child who dared to speak the truth and a man who finally learned how to listen. Ethan Caldwell woke to the sound of birds outside his window and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. The morning light spilled gently across the room, painting soft patterns on the walls. For the first time in months, he felt rested. The air inside the mansion had changed. It no longer felt heavy with secrets. Downstairs, laughter drifted faintly, light and musical. He followed the sound to find Lila standing on a stool beside Mrs. Benson, helping her mix batter for breakfast muffins. Her hands and cheeks were dusted with flour, and her smile was bright. "You are awake," Lila said when she saw him. "We are making blueberry muffins. Mrs. Benson said they are your favorite." Ethan smiled, stepping closer. "They are, though I have never seen anyone look happier doing it." "Mrs. Benson chuckled. "She insisted on helping. I believe she has a future in baking." "Or eating," Lila added quickly, grinning. Ethan laughed quietly, the sound surprising even himself. That might be true. The simple joy of the scene made something inside him settle. For so long, his house had been filled with cold efficiency, not warmth. Now, it pulsed with life again. They ate together at the kitchen table, the sunlight catching in Lila's curls. She told stories about her aunt's garden, about the stray cat that used to follow her home, about how she once tried to plant a lemon seed in a cup and waited weeks for it to grow. Ethan listened intently, genuinely interested in every word. When breakfast was over, he stood and said, "Lila, would you like to see the greenhouse? It has been neglected for too long, but I think we can bring it back to life." Her eyes widened with excitement. "Can we plant something?" "That is exactly what I had in mind," he said. Mrs. Benson handed Lila a small basket of gardening tools, and together they walked down the garden path to the glass greenhouse behind the mansion. Dust coated the windows, and wild ivy curled around the frame, but inside, sunlight filtered through the glass like gold. Old pots and soil bags were stacked in corners, and the faint smell of earth filled the air. "It looks sad," Lila said softly. Ethan nodded. "Yes, but sad things can grow again if someone cares enough to help them." She smiled, picking up a small trowel. "Then let us help." They worked side by side, clearing weeds and turning the soil. Lila's small hands moved carefully, scooping dirt and smoothing it out. Ethan watched her with quiet admiration. "You are very patient," he said. "Gardens need patience," she replied. "My mom said plants can feel it when you rush them." He smiled faintly. "Your mother sounds like she understood a lot about life." "She did," Lila said. "She said growing things was like healing. It takes time, and sometimes you do not even notice it is happening until one day, everything blooms again." Ethan fell silent for a moment, her words echoing in his mind. He thought about how true they were, not just for gardens, but for people too. After a while, they planted seeds together, lavender, basil, and a few sunflowers from an old packet Lila found in a drawer. When they finished, they stood back and looked at the neat rows of soil. "They do not look like much now," Lila said, tilting her head. "Give them time," Ethan replied. "Everything begins small." She looked up at him. "Like me? Exactly like you," he said with a smile. The afternoon passed peacefully. They watered the new plants and cleaned the greenhouse windows until the sunlight poured in fully, illuminating every corner. When they were done, Ethan wiped his hands on a cloth and said, "I think this place just started breathing again." Lila laughed. "Then it matches the house." They walked back up the path, dirt on their shoes and sunlight on their faces. Inside, Mrs. Benson had set out lemonade on the porch. They sat together, sipping the cool drink while watching the wind ripple through the tall trees. "Mr. Caldwell," Lila said after a while, "when the flowers grow, can we give some to people who need them, like the hospital or the shelter?" He looked at her, surprised and touched. "That is a beautiful idea. Yes, we can do that. Because," she continued earnestly, "my mom said when you share what grows from kindness, it keeps growing even more." Ethan nodded slowly. Your mom was right about everything, wasn't she? Almost everything, Lila said with a small grin. She never could bake like Mrs. Benson. They both laughed, the sound mingling with the wind and the song of distant birds. As the sun began to set, Ethan glanced toward the greenhouse. The light caught the glass, and for a moment it glowed like gold. He thought about how far he had come from a man trapped in lies and loss to someone who had found hope again in the smallest, simplest acts. Lila leaned her head against his arm, her voice soft. See? I told you broken things can grow again. He looked down at her, his chest full of gratitude. Yes, Lila, he said quietly. You were right. The day faded into evening, but the light in their hearts remained steady. In the quiet of that moment, Ethan Caldwell finally understood that healing did not come from rebuilding walls or reclaiming power. It came from planting new things and believing they could bloom. The next morning, the mansion woke to the sound of rain tapping gently against the windows. The sky was soft and gray, and the air smelled of wet earth and blooming lavender from the garden. Ethan Caldwell stood by the window in his study, watching droplets slide down the glass in slow, perfect lines. The greenhouse they had worked on the day before shimmered faintly through the mist, its shape clear even in the fog. He smiled, remembering Lila's laughter as she planted the seeds with such care, talking to them as if they were friends who needed encouragement. Downstairs, he could already hear her voice, bright and full of life. He walked to the kitchen and found her standing near the back door, her nose pressed against the window pane as she watched the rain fall. Mrs. Benson was pouring hot cocoa into 2 mugs. Morning, Ethan said softly. Lila turned and grinned. It is raining again, Mr. Caldwell, but the greenhouse is happy. Plants love rain, even when people don't. He chuckled. That might be true. Mrs. Benson handed him a mug, then one to Lila. I swear this girl was born from sunlight and soil, she said. She belongs in a garden. Lila sipped her cocoa and looked thoughtful. Maybe that's why I like it here. It feels like everything's growing again. Ethan smiled. It is. The rain continued steadily, wrapping the house in a calm rhythm. Later that afternoon, when the clouds began to part, Ethan decided to take Lila into town. You have been cooped up in this house for days, he said. Let's get some air. Her eyes lit up. Can we get flowers for the greenhouse? Yes, he said, and maybe a few books for you. She clapped her hands excitedly. Deal. The drive into town was quiet but peaceful. The streets were slick with rain, and the shop windows reflected the soft glow of afternoon light. They stopped at a small bookstore first. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, and the scent of paper and coffee filled the air. Lila wandered between the aisles, her small fingers brushing across the spines of books. She stopped at the children's section, picking up a book with a picture of a fox and a little girl on the cover. This one looks like us, she said. Ethan smiled. Then let's get it. At the counter, the shop owner, an elderly woman with kind eyes, smiled at Lila. That's a good choice, sweetheart. The story's about courage and kindness. Lila looked up at her. Those are my favorite things. The woman laughed softly. Then you'll love it. Afterward, they visited the florist. The shop was full of color rows of tulips, daisies, and roses arranged neatly in glass vases. Lila moved among them with wonder, as if she had stepped into another world. Can we get these? She asked, pointing to a tray of small lavender plants. They remind me of home. Of course, Ethan said. They bought several pots, and as they carried them to the car, the florist smiled. She's got a good eye, she said to Ethan. That little one sees beauty in everything. Ethan looked at Lila, who was carefully protecting the plants from the drizzle. Yes, he said quietly. She really does. When they returned to the mansion, the rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and fresh. Together, they brought the plants into the greenhouse. The light filtering through the glass made the water droplets on the leaves sparkle like tiny diamonds. Lila knelt down and began placing each pot carefully along the wooden shelves. Now it feels like a real garden, she said. A garden of second chances. Ethan crouched beside her. That's a good name for it. She looked up, smiling. Then that's what we'll call it. They worked until the sun began to set, the sky turning soft shades of pink and gold. When they finished, they stood at the doorway, looking at what they had built together. It's beautiful, Lila said. I think my mom would have liked it here. Ethan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. I think she would have too. As they walked back toward the house, the evening light wrapped them in warmth. Lila glanced up at him and said, Mr. Caldwell, do you think people can change, even if they've done bad things? He thought for a long moment before answering. I think people can always change. They just have to want to. She nodded slowly. Then I'm glad you wanted to. His steps faltered slightly, her words striking something deep inside him. He looked down at her, smiling softly. So am I, Lila. They reached the front steps, and before going inside, Lila turned back toward the garden. The last light of the sun glowed through the glass of the greenhouse. See, she whispered, even the house is smiling. Ethan followed her gaze and realized she was right. The mansion no longer looked like a place haunted by loss. It looked alive, filled with purpose, like a soul rediscovering its breath. As they stepped inside, he felt the quiet certainty that healing was not a destination, it was a journey, and they were both walking it together, one honest day at a time. The following week brought a soft, golden calm that settled over everything. The days began early. Filled with the sounds of life returning to the mansion, Lila's laughter echoing through the halls, Mrs. Benson humming in the kitchen, and the faint rustle of wind moving through the open windows. Ethan Caldwell found himself waking up each morning not to dread but to a quiet anticipation, a sense that something good might happen before the day ended. One morning, he stood in the garden beside Lila, who was crouched over the soil, checking the progress of the seeds they had planted. Tiny green sprouts had begun to push through the dirt, fragile but determined. Look, she said, her voice full of wonder, they are growing. Ethan knelt beside her, smiling. I told you they would. You took good care of them. She grinned. They just needed someone to believe they could. Her words struck him more deeply than she realized. I think that's true for people too, he said. Lila nodded solemnly, brushing dirt off her hands. You believed in me first. Ethan looked at her, the sincerity in her small face both humbling and healing. You made it easy to believe, he said. They spent the morning tending to the plants, watering the rows and brushing away fallen leaves. When they finished, Lila wiped her forehead with the back of her hand and smiled. The garden of second chances looks happy today. It does, Ethan agreed. Maybe it knows it's being loved. Later that day, Mrs. Benson called them in for lunch. The table was filled with the smell of roasted vegetables and warm bread. They ate together, laughing over stories from the morning. Ethan noticed that even Mrs. Benson seemed lighter these days, her eyes softer and her smile easier. After lunch, Lila went to the library to read the book she had picked from the bookstore, the one about the fox and the little girl. Ethan watched her settle into the big leather chair near the window, her legs tucked under her, her lips moving silently as she read. The sight filled him with a quiet peace. As the afternoon sun drifted lower, a knock sounded at the front door. Mrs. Benson went to answer, and a moment later, she appeared in the doorway to the library, her expression cautious. Mr. Caldwell, she said softly, there is someone here to see you. Ethan rose, a faint unease creeping into his chest. When he reached the foyer, his breath caught. Standing there, soaked from the rain and looking exhausted, was his wife Claire. Her hair was tangled, her eyes red from tears, and she held nothing but a small bag clutched to her chest. Ethan, she whispered, her voice trembling. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of rain filled the silence between them. Finally, Ethan said quietly, Why are you here, Claire? She took a shaky breath. Because I had nowhere else to go, and because I needed to see you to tell you everything. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. You should come inside. She stepped in slowly, dripping water onto the polished floor. Mrs. Benson disappeared quietly, sensing the weight of the moment. Lila appeared at the edge of the hall, holding her book close to her chest, her eyes wide with confusion. Claire noticed her and froze. Who is she? She asked softly. Ethan turned to Lila, his expression gentle. Lila. This is Claire. She is someone from my past. Lila nodded politely. Hello, she said. Claire blinked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hello. Ethan motioned toward the living room. We should talk. Claire sat on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling slightly. I heard about what you did, she said. You told the truth. You saved the company. Ethan's eyes were steady. I did what was right. What you couldn't. She flinched at his words. I know. I thought I was protecting you, but I was only protecting myself. They used me, and I was too blind to see it until it was too late. Her voice cracked. I lost everything, Ethan. The people I trusted turned their backs on me. I thought you would too. I almost did, he admitted. But then I met someone who reminded me that people can change if they choose to. Claire followed his gaze toward Lila, who stood quietly near the doorway, listening without understanding everything. She changed you, Claire said softly. Ethan nodded. She reminded me of what matters. Claire's eyes filled with tears. I am sorry, she whispered. For everything. He looked at her for a long time, then said, You cannot erase what happened, but maybe you can start over somewhere. She nodded slowly, tears sliding down her cheeks. I do not expect forgiveness, Ethan. I just needed you to know the truth. Lila stepped forward shyly. People can grow again, she said softly, clutching her book. Even after bad things. Claire turned toward her, startled, then smiled faintly through her tears. I hope so. The rain outside softened to a gentle drizzle. Ethan stood and said quietly, Mrs. Benson will prepare a room for you tonight. Tomorrow, we can decide what comes next. Claire nodded, exhausted but grateful. As Ethan turned away, he felt Lila's small hand slip into his. He looked down to see her eyes full of quiet understanding. You did the right thing, she whispered. He squeezed her hand gently. I hope so, Lila. I really hope so. In the distance, the storm clouds began to break, and faint sunlight pushed through, touching the house with light once again. Ethan Caldwell woke early the next morning to a quiet house, and the faint scent of rain still lingering in the air. The memory of the previous night pressed heavily against his thoughts. Claire was asleep in one of the guest rooms, and though her presence brought no anger, it carried a sadness that words could not fully express. He sat by the window in his study, staring out at the garden where dew glistened like tiny mirrors across the leaves. The greenhouse stood tall in the morning light, its glass walls shining softly. That place had become a symbol of something pure, something reborn, and now, he wondered if forgiveness could grow the same way. Downstairs, he heard the soft creak of footsteps. Lila was awake, moving through the hall in her slippers, carrying the book she always kept close. When she saw him, her face brightened. Good morning, Mr. Caldwell, she said gently. You did not sleep. He smiled faintly. No, not much. Because she is here? Lila asked carefully. Ethan nodded. Yes, it is. Complicated. Lila climbed onto the chair across from him and rested her elbows on the desk. My mom used to say that forgiveness is not saying what someone did was right. It is saying you are tired of hurting. Her words were simple, but they struck deep. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, the weight of her innocence carrying more truth than he could deny. Your mother was right, he said softly. She usually was, Lila replied with a small smile. Are you still mad at her? I do not know, Ethan admitted. I think I am just sad. Lila nodded slowly. Then maybe you are ready to forgive. Her voice was calm, wise beyond her years, and Ethan realized how much light she had quietly brought into his life. Later that morning, the sound of the kitchen came alive, Mrs. Benson moving between cupboards, the hum of the coffee machine, the rhythm of a house slowly waking. Claire appeared at the edge of the doorway, her hair brushed, her eyes heavy with sleeplessness. Good morning, she said softly. Ethan met her gaze with quiet composure. Good morning. Lila looked between them, sensing the fragile silence. I will go check on the garden, she said and slipped out, leaving them alone. Claire took a seat at the table. I heard her in the hall last night, she said. She has a kind voice. Ethan nodded. She is remarkable. She reminds me of you when you cared more about people than numbers, Claire said, her tone gentle, not accusatory. I did care once, he replied, and then I forgot how. She looked down, folding her hands together. We both forgot. The honesty in her voice disarmed him. I do not hate you, Claire, he said after a pause, but I cannot forget what happened. I am not asking you to, she said. I just want to find a way to be better, even if that means doing it far away from here. Her eyes glistened with sincerity. "When I left, I told myself I was protecting you. But the truth is, I was protecting my pride. I could not face what I had done. And now I see that it cost me everything that mattered." Ethan studied her quietly, his expression unreadable. "If you are serious about changing, then start with yourself. You cannot fix the past, but you can stop running from it." Claire nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "I will." Before Ethan could respond, Lila's voice called from the garden, "Mr. Caldwell, you have to come see this." He and Claire both turned toward the sound, and for a moment, they were just two people bound by the voice of a child who carried no judgment. They stepped outside together. The rain had washed the world clean, and the sun now shimmered through the glass of the greenhouse. Lila stood among the rows of plants, her face lit with awe. "Look," she exclaimed. Tiny green sprouts had broken through the soil stronger, taller than before. They grew overnight. Ethan knelt beside her, smiling as he touched one of the leaves. "You see? Growth happens quietly when you take care of what matters." Lila nodded. "They are brave, like you." Claire stood a few steps behind them, watching the two of them together, her heart twisting with regret and something softer hope. "She was right," Claire said quietly. "Even broken things can grow again." Ethan looked up at her, meeting her eyes for the first time without anger. "Yes," he said simply. Lila looked between them, sensing the change but not needing to understand it fully. "The garden of second chances," she said proudly. "It is working." They all smiled, a fragile but real moment of peace hanging in the air. The three of them stood there as the light grew brighter, washing over their faces. For the first time in years, Ethan felt that forgiveness might not be a single choice but a slow, steady process like tending to the soil until life returns. As they walked back to the house, Lila slipped her small hand into his. "See?" she said softly. "Even the rain helped." Ethan glanced down at her, his heart full. "Yes, Lila," he said. "The rain helped more than I realized." And in that quiet moment, he knew that both the garden and their lives had begun to bloom again, not because of what had been lost, but because of what had been found. Ethan Caldwell spent the next few days watching the quiet rhythm of his home shift again. The tension that had once filled the air was softening, replaced by a cautious peace. Claire kept mostly to herself, spending hours in the guest room or walking through the garden in silence. Lila moved through the house with her usual brightness, but she seemed to sense the heaviness that lingered between the adults. One morning, Ethan found her in the greenhouse, carefully watering the new sprouts. "They are growing so fast," she said proudly, glancing up at him. "Even the small ones." He smiled. "They are learning to be strong, just like you," Lila giggled. "Maybe like you too," Ethan chuckled. "Maybe." She looked thoughtful for a moment, then said, "She watches the garden a lot. Maybe she wants to grow too." He followed her gaze toward the window where Claire stood at a distance, her face unreadable. "Maybe she does," Ethan said quietly. "Growing takes courage. So does forgiving," Lila replied softly. Her words lingered in his mind long after she had left the greenhouse. That afternoon, Ethan returned to his study to make a few calls about the company. His assistant had informed him that the investigation into the corruption scandal was nearly complete, and several former board members were now facing legal charges. Justice, though slow, was being served. When he hung up the phone, he sat for a long while in silence, thinking about how much had changed since that night he came home early and found his world unraveling. He thought about how loss had turned into something else, not closure exactly, but understanding. Outside, the sun began to dip, casting golden light across the walls. A knock came at the door. "Come in," he said. Claire stepped inside, holding a small box. "I wanted to give you this," she said quietly. "It is the only thing I saved from everything before." She set the box on his desk and opened it. Inside was a photograph of them taken years ago at a charity event. They looked happy, unaware of the storms that would later come. "I kept it," she said, "not because I wanted to hold on to the past, but because I needed to remember who we were before everything fell apart." Ethan looked at the photo for a long time, then said, "We were different people then." "Yes," she replied, but not bad ones. Just lost. Her honesty surprised him. You could leave, Claire, he said softly. Start over somewhere else. You do not have to stay here. I know, she said, but I needed to face what I broke before I can build anything again. I needed you to see that I am not running this time. Ethan nodded slowly. Then stay. For now. Her eyes filled with tears. But she smiled faintly. Thank you. As she turned to leave, Lila appeared in the doorway, holding a single sunflower she had picked from the greenhouse. For you, she said, walking toward Claire. It means hope. Claire knelt down, touched by the gesture. Thank you, Lila. It is beautiful. Lila smiled. It will grow even more if you keep it near the light. Claire looked up at Ethan, her eyes shining. She is incredible. She is, he agreed quietly. That evening, the three of them sat together at the dinner table for the first time. The meal was simple roasted chicken, vegetables, and fresh bread, but the air around them felt almost sacred. Lila talked about the garden, about how the lavender had begun to bloom, and how she wanted to give flowers to the people at the shelter soon. They will be so happy, she said, because flowers make even sad places look like they remember joy. Ethan smiled, glancing at Claire. You have a way of reminding everyone of joy, Lila. Claire nodded. She reminds me too. The light outside faded into twilight, and for a brief moment, it felt like time itself had slowed, giving them space to simply exist. After dinner, Ethan walked Lila upstairs. As he tucked her into bed, she looked up at him and asked, Mr. Caldwell, when people change, do they stay changed? He hesitated. Sometimes they do, he said, but it depends on how much they want to. I think she wants to, Lila whispered sleepily. I can tell. Ethan smiled gently. Then maybe she will. She yawned, curling under the blanket. Good night, Mr. Caldwell. Good night, Lila. When he returned downstairs, Claire was sitting in the living room, staring into the soft glow of the fireplace. She is a remarkable child, she said without looking up. She is the reason this house feels alive again. Ethan nodded, standing beside her. She taught me more about courage than anyone else ever could. Claire turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Do you think there is still something left for us to save? He looked at her for a long moment. I do not know, he said honestly, but maybe we can find out. She nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. The fire crackled quietly, filling the silence between them with warmth instead of tension. Outside, the moon rose over the garden, casting silver light on the glass of the greenhouse. The garden of second chances stood tall, alive, and glowing softly in the dark, just like the people inside the house who were learning, in their own fragile ways, how to begin again. Ethan Caldwell woke to the golden light of early morning filtering through the tall windows. The air in the mansion felt different still, but no longer heavy. It carried the quiet hum of peace, the kind that comes only after storms have spent their last strength. Downstairs, he could hear the soft clinking of dishes and the low murmur of voices. When he entered the kitchen, he saw Lila sitting at the table with a small notepad, drawing something carefully with a blue pencil. Claire stood nearby, helping Mrs. Benson prepare breakfast. She looked calm, almost at ease, though her movements still carried a trace of uncertainty, as if she was afraid the moment might break if she breathed too loudly. Lila looked up when Ethan walked in. Good morning, Mr. Caldwell, she said cheerfully. We are making pancakes. I can see that, Ethan said, smiling as he sat across from her. And what are you working on so early? She turned the notepad toward him. It was a simple but heartfelt drawing of the greenhouse surrounded by bright flowers, with the words, Garden of Second Chances, written neatly above it. It is for the people at the shelter, she explained. When the flowers bloom, I want to take them there, but I also want to give them this picture so they know where the flowers came from. Ethan looked at her, deeply moved. That is a beautiful idea, Lila. Claire glanced over her shoulder, her voice soft. It really is. Lila grinned. Then we should all go together. Ethan hesitated, his gaze meeting Claire's for a brief moment. There was history between them, but also something new, something fragile and real. All right, he said finally. We will go together. After breakfast, the three of them drove into town. The roads were lined with trees shimmering in the early light, their leaves wet with dew. The shelter was small but well cared for, tucked behind a church with tall white steps and windows that caught the sunday. When they arrived, Lila carried a basket full of freshly cut lavender, daisies, and small sunflowers from the greenhouse. The volunteers at the shelter greeted them warmly. "These are beautiful," one of them said. "Did you grow them yourself?" Lila nodded proudly. "Me and Mr. Caldwell. We take care of them every day." The volunteer smiled. "They will brighten this place. Thank you, sweetheart." As they helped arrange the flowers inside, Ethan noticed how the simple act seemed to fill the room with warmth. People who had been sitting quietly began to talk and smile, their faces softening. Lila's laughter spread like sunlight. Watching her, Ethan realized that kindness had a power no amount of wealth could buy. It could heal, not just others, but the person who gave it. When they were done, Lila handed the volunteer her drawing. "This is the garden," she said, "where the flowers came from. You can hang it somewhere, so people remember that things grow again." The woman took the drawing, her eyes shining. "We will, thank you." On the drive back, the car was quiet in that peaceful way that follows something good. Lila leaned against the window, humming softly to herself. Claire looked out at the passing fields, her hands resting on her lap. "Finally," she said. "She reminds me of how we used to be, before everything became about numbers and power." Ethan nodded. "She reminded me too." Claire turned to him. "You changed, Ethan. I can see it. The man I hurt is not the man sitting here now." He kept his eyes on the road. "I had help," he said simply. "Lila made me see what I had forgotten." "And me?" Claire asked softly. "Do you think there is still hope for me to change too?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Hope is not something anyone can give or take. It is something you decide to keep." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe I will try." When they reached the mansion, the afternoon sun was warm and bright. Lila ran ahead, her laughter echoing across the garden. Ethan and Claire followed more slowly. "I will not stay forever," Claire said quietly as they walked. "You do not need to," Ethan replied. "You just need to find your way again." She nodded. "Maybe I already have, just a little." In the greenhouse, Lila was already kneeling by the rows of plants, checking the soil. "They missed us," she said. "They look happy again." Ethan crouched beside her. "Maybe they were just waiting for us to come back." Claire joined them, running her fingers lightly over the petals of a new bloom. "It smells like hope," she said softly. Lila giggled. "Hope smells like lavender then." The three of them laughed together, and for a moment, the sound filled every corner of the glass house. That evening, after dinner, Ethan stood by the window of his study, watching the stars appear one by one. The reflection of the greenhouse shimmered faintly in the glass. Behind him, he heard Lila's footsteps. She walked up beside him, holding her worn book close to her chest. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "do you think everything that was broken is fixed now?" He looked down at her. "No," he said gently, "but I think everything that was broken is learning how to heal." She nodded thoughtfully. "Then that is good enough," he smiled. "Yes, Lila, that is good enough." Outside, the night deepened, wrapping the house and its quiet garden in peace. The garden of second chances stood tall beneath the stars, alive with the quiet strength of forgiveness, growth, and the small, unbreakable faith of a little girl who believed that kindness could make even the hardest hearts bloom again. The days that followed unfolded with a calm rhythm that felt almost sacred. The mansion, once a monument of silence and regret, now breathed with life. The scent of blooming lavender drifted through open windows, sunlight spilled across polished floors, and laughter echoed in hallways that had long forgotten joy. Ethan Caldwell found himself standing on the back porch one morning, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the greenhouse shimmer under the golden light. Inside, Lila was kneeling by the flowers, her small hands moving carefully as she trimmed the leaves. Claire stood nearby, tying ribbons around bundles of lavender to deliver to the shelter later that day. They looked peaceful, both lost in their quiet work. It was a sight that made Ethan's chest tighten not with pain, but with gratitude. He remembered the man he had been before all of this, proud, distant, powerful in every way except the ways that truly mattered. And now, here he was, humbled by the wisdom of a child who had arrived on a stormy night and changed everything without even meaning to. Lila noticed him watching and waved with both hands. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," she called out. He smiled. "Good morning, Lila. How is the Garden of Second Chances today?" She grinned. "It is perfect. Even the smallest flowers are blooming now. That is because someone believed in them," he said. "And in us," she added softly. Her words warmed him more than the sunlight ever could. A few hours later, they packed the car with baskets of flowers and headed to the shelter once more. The drive was peaceful, the air filled with the scent of lavender and fresh soil. When they arrived, people greeted them like old friends. Lila handed out flowers to everyone she saw, mothers, children, men sitting quietly with tired eyes. The joy on their faces was quiet but deep, like the kind that roots itself and grows slowly. Claire spoke with one of the volunteers, her posture no longer guarded but open, her laughter soft and genuine. Ethan stood back for a moment, watching them both, realizing that the greatest wealth he had ever gained was standing right there in front of him. On the way home, Lila sang softly from the back seat, her voice sweet and light. The song was one her mother had taught her, a melody about hope and morning light. Claire turned to Ethan and smiled. "She has her mother's heart," she said quietly. "She sees goodness even where others see ruin." "That is her gift," Ethan replied. "She does not wait for things to be perfect. She simply loves them as they are, and somehow that makes them better." When they reached the mansion, the afternoon light stretched long and warm across the fields. Lila ran ahead to the greenhouse, spinning in the sunlight. Ethan and Claire followed slowly behind. "I will be leaving soon," Claire said softly. "There is a small art program opening downtown for kids who have been through difficult times. They need volunteers, and I think that is where I should be." Ethan nodded, his voice calm. "Then go, help them, start over the way you need to." She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "Thank you, Ethan, for not shutting the door. Someone once told me that forgiveness is not saying what someone did was right," he said, smiling faintly. "It is saying you are tired of hurting." She smiled through her tears. "Lila said that, didn't she?" "Yes," Ethan replied, "and she was right." Claire exhaled shakily, then looked toward the garden. "You did good, Ethan. You built something real here." "No," he said quietly. "She did." They both looked toward Lila, who was now kneeling beside a row of sunflowers, humming softly as she worked. The sight filled them with the kind of peace that words could never capture. That evening, as the sun began to set, Ethan walked out to the greenhouse one last time before dinner. Lila was there, arranging small pots along the shelves. "Do you think the garden will ever stop growing?" she asked without looking up. "No," he said. "As long as someone cares for it, it will keep growing." She smiled, satisfied. "Then it will always be here." Ethan crouched beside her, his voice low and steady. "You know, Lila, when I first met you, I thought you were just a little girl who got lost during a storm. But now I know you were meant to find me." She looked up at him, her eyes wide and bright. "Maybe we were meant to find each other." He nodded. "I think so." Outside, the sky turned shades of gold and violet, the air still and warm. The last rays of sunlight caught on the glass, making the greenhouse glow like a lantern in the dusk. Lila leaned her head against his arm. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "It is," he agreed. "And so are you, Lila. You are the bravest person I have ever known." She smiled, her voice barely a whisper. "You too, Mr. Caldwell." They stood there for a long moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of life, the sound of leaves, the soft buzz of bees, the slow breath of the earth healing itself. For Ethan, time felt suspended, as if the universe was holding its breath to honor what had been mended. When they finally walked back to the house, the lights glowed warmly through the windows, and the air carried the smell of Mrs. Benson's cooking. Claire was setting the table, and when she saw them, she smiled not with regret, but with peace. The world outside was still imperfect, full of storms yet to come, but inside that house, kindness had built something that could not be destroyed. As night fell and the stars shimmered over the Garden of Second Chances, Ethan Caldwell finally understood that redemption was not found in power or wealth. It was found in the courage to forgive, the will to grow, and the gentle, unstoppable heart of a child who believed in miracles.